Hello, and welcome to my Diablo 4 beta video. I'll be sharing some of my thoughts and concerns after spending, if I had to guess, 30 hours over the first weekend. Now, I don't consider myself some kind of great prognosticator, but I am quite optimistic about the game after getting a feel for it. So I'll start out a little bit of lore about myself. I'm an old school Diablo fan, started with vanilla Diablo 2, not Diablo 1. But I enjoyed it quite a bit. Didn't really get hooked until after the expansion was released. Diablo 2 was the first game I really got engrossed in and played heavily for multiple years. Real life eventually got in the way of my Diablo addiction, but after a few years of mostly light console gaming, I heard about some kind of crazy sequel to Warcraft 3. Now, I've never been much of an RTS gamer, but I had played Warcraft 3, and I enjoyed the story well enough. So eventually I made the mistake of playing World of Warcraft. Oddly, I wasn't all that impressed at first, so I played rather casually again. And I don't believe I even got to max level in vanilla. Didn't do any kind of endgame, certainly didn't raid. I thought the game made massive improvements with the release of the Burning Crusade X-Pack, however. And then I was hooked. Still play the game today. Well, classic at WoW at least. I haven't touched retail since early BFA. As for Diablo 3, I really enjoyed vanilla D3, but I had the opposite experience from D2 when it comes to the expansion. For me, the Reaper of Souls X-Pack, it really just killed the game. With D2, I felt like the X-Pack enhanced and expanded the endgame grind, whereas the D3 X-Pack made the game just seem much smaller. But that's just a bit of history on my Diablo and MMO experience. So how about Diablo 4? Graphics-wise, the game is incredible. I really do enjoy the art style. The combat feels great, for the most part. I do agree with the common sentiment that melee is significantly less fun than ranged due to how the monsters interact with melee. The ranged monsters tend to always be moving away, while bosses will drop a pool of poison or fire underneath themselves, and then just soak in it like some kind of demonic hot tub streamer. The barbarians of the north have sadly been outwitted here. Now, it could be the case that this will mostly be a problem at low level. With an endgame build, all decked out in legendary affixes, you'll undoubtedly improve the imbalance here. Even most casual action RPG fans are aware of how different the early game plays compared to endgame. I got the same feeling with D4. Start out very weak with a single ability, and slowly but surely you grow in power. So while I did see reason for concern regarding melee, I don't think it necessarily means doom for endgame melee enjoyers, even in the current build. I played the bulk of the first beta weekend with a friend who was playing a barb, and oddly enough, she actually enjoyed her time on the barb most of all. Perhaps being grouped up made melee a better experience? I don't know. Personally, I was least impressed with the barb out of the 3 classes available. I've seen quite a bit of disdain for the UI. While I agree it is lacking, especially compared to how great the rest of the game looks, it certainly isn't game-breaking. So I'd happily take some improvement here, but I wouldn't consider it a huge priority. One thing I haven't seen any discussion about is the chat window. Maybe it's just not that important to people these days, but I found it to be rather bad. Just trying to link items between my friend and I as it was a hassle. Maybe there's an option somewhere in the settings that I didn't see. Didn't really look for it. But to make the chat window interactable without actually opening the chat. But as far as I could tell, you had to open the chat. And you can't click on the item unless you open the chat. So on more than one occasion, my friend would link a legendary item that just dropped for her. It pops up in the chat window, so I click it. But instead of my character, just runs down to the absolute bottom right corner of the screen where I just clicked. So you got to press the enter button to open chat, then click the item link. Now at this point I've forgotten my chat window's even open, since I didn't want to type anything to begin with. So when I start pushing my spells, I'm instead typing in the chat window. Again, is this something that's completely game breaking? No. But it also doesn't strike me as something that should be hard to do well. I enjoyed my first look at itemization. Having plus to skills make a return is great, in my opinion. Being able to make a build by picking up a skill through equipping an item instead of using a talent point can make for interesting gearing decisions. The system of removing legendary affixes and applying it to another item looks pretty cool on its face. I'm not worried at all about set items not being included at launch or rune words, heck even runes. I feel like there will be more than enough items, and it's good to have things on the back burner for future release. One concern I do have about items is that really I think there's just simply too many of them. I'm quite sure I've heard a dev comment that loot raining from the skies was not going to carry over from D3, but for my time in the beta, it felt very similar. So hopefully drop rates are tuned higher just for the beta and testing purposes, but I haven't heard anything regarding that, so I fear this could be how it's intended. We'll have to see. As far as characterization, I'm more concerned, actually, that it'll be too complex than it will be too simple. While the talent trees look pretty simple on their face, I think there will be tough decisions to make. My feeling, at least, is that I'll never have quite enough talent points for everything I would want in any given build. Then you have the rather large Paragon board that opens up at 50 on top of that, which will also have glyph enhancements for further min-maxing. The class-specific systems are another layer on top of it all. The sorcerer seems particularly complex to me with all the interactions, or possible interactions, that they have working on there. When I say I'm more worried about it being too complex, I don't mean to say that complexity in general is bad. However, the more complex the game is, the higher likelihood it is unbalanced, which nobody wants to play an unbalanced game. This next opinion may be unpopular, but I think the monetization is actually quite good, with the usual caveat that pay for power should never be added. But I want the game to succeed and improve over time. Without continued funding, that becomes highly unlikely. So I say sell as many battle passes and cosmetics as you possibly can. Hell, I'd even be fine with some minor, shall we say, pay-to-win adjacent items, such as increased stash size, something that doesn't make it easier for you to kill a difficult monster, but it's still a pretty big advantage to have. Some may scream, slippery slope, but I have immense confidence in the greed of all giant corporations, and I don't see any way that they kill off a cash cow by adding pay to win, which I truly believe it would kill Diablo 4 if they did add that. One of the biggest concerns I've seen is regarding endgame, which I suppose makes sense since we know the least about it and must draw inferences from early game and just other info that Blizzard has put out. I agree the dungeon mechanics are less than inspiring in general. Personally, I just hope dungeons aren't the meta, but just another aspect of the endgame. I don't want to repeat a Greater Rift from Diablo 3. Except this time we have to run to the rift out in the wild. That actually even sounds worse. I much prefer open world farming in an action RPG. Considering the large focus Blizzard is putting on the open shared world, I really hope instance dungeon farming doesn't become the meta. One of my favorite additions in Diablo 3 were the little events placed throughout the open world. D4 seems to have much more of these, which make open world farming more exciting. While discussing endgame, I believe I heard Asmongold say there won't be mount farming. Well, at launch that looks to certainly be accurate, but I assume he eventually takes an L on that statement. With the direction of the series, the MMOization of it, I think it's a near certainty that rare mounts and cosmetic drops are added in-game. World bosses seem like a natural fit for such items. For sake of example, let's say world bosses fall out of favor with players at some point. They just aren't, they don't drop, they're not productive enough to go farm. So if they aren't being slaughtered in sufficient enough numbers, maybe add a rare mount to the loot table. That would be a big incentive for some people. Maybe world bosses and dungeon bosses both drop this rare mount, but the world boss is a slightly higher drop rate, say 1 in 200, and dungeon bosses are dropping at 1 in 1,000. So you could get it either way, depending on how you like to farm. But there's a better chance for the world boss. What I'm getting at is, there are a lot of things that can be added from the MMO sphere of influence to beef up endgame, short of, say, full-blown raiding. In conclusion, based off my time with the beta, I think D4 has a lot of potential. Will it be perfect on launch? How many games really are? I do think it will be very fun right out of the gate, due to the great combat and incredible visuals. I've been impressed with the Diablo 4 dev team. I think they have gone above and beyond as far as sharing progress and listening to feedback during the entire production time, which, along with somewhat heavy monetization, I'm hopeful for regular improvements and balancing for years to come post-launch. Thank you for watching my video. Appreciate it much. If you liked it, go ahead and hit the like button. Maybe even subscribe. Who knows? Take care.